All right.
Oh,
He's on enabling
Versus
one.
Whoa.
it's just start recording.
No, the one that says start streaming, right above it.
It says stop streaming right now.
Then you're good. I got the notification that it started, so.
Thank you. Maybe we should get those notifications as well.
Right. Yes, I think you're right.
Okay, welcome to the start of a grueling process. And I want to reiterate, we had a tough time last year, and yet we all worked together, and you guys made sacrifices, and it was a really collaborative process. And I want to thank you again for that. Last year, it seems like we just finished last year's budget. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. So we're going to start again. And Ann couldn't be here tonight, but we're gonna start with building inspector, clerk, community development, and IT. And I want to reiterate that we really don't see this as an adversarial. Nobody else can come in as an adversarial process at all. You know that our tensions get a little high sometimes because this is important stuff. It is to you, it is to the city, it is to us. So I'll ask for your forgiveness ahead of time if I ever get a little tense. But we know we're all in this together. So as I said in my email to the department heads, we're going to continue with the same kind of process in certain terms, which is the councilors and the mayor will review the lines ahead of time and highlight what they see jumping out at them as of any concern. So we're going to do the line by line to some extent, but also what I had invited you to do is to become part of an even more long-term process, which is to assist us in planning. And that means that despite the fact that we're working a tight budget, it's really time for us to start thinking about the future. So we don't just want to hear where you can cut, but what the future holds, what you think about your office, your department, and what it contributes to the vitality of the city in the next 3 years, very seriously, because we have a lot of initiatives going on, and we're not distinct from each other with all of those, and so we really need to integrate and find a way to synthesize this into a plan. So even if we can't have our dreams right now in 2017, at least you know where we're headed and what we're doing with that, so that we can say, here's a priority, because this is what is going to contribute the most to the planning that we're doing. This is what's going to support the initiatives that we have going on. And we're going to do that, and keeping in mind too, we have a fund balance policy. So my hope is by the time we get to the end of the process this year, and we start looking at capital projects, we will be able to say, okay, where are the capital projects that support the things that you all have identified? So this really is an invitation for all of us to do this planning together. So before we get started, Joe has someplace to be in a short while, so he asked if he could go first, but do any of the councilors have any other preliminary remarks or questions? Okay. Joe, let's start off with what you see, what you want your office to contribute, how you see the role of your office, and what you have heard from this council for the past 3 years, our concerns, our interests, and where those are going to take us, and how you're going to help get us there.
Okay, do I do that from here, or do
I think you do, in fact, need to be in front of the mic so that the public can hear your wishes and dreams as well.
Okay, I gave you all some information there. I gave you a 4-year run out. But we can start with 17 if you want, line items on that. My overall budget for 17 is up.
It's page 10, the line, yes.
Is up $6,400, which is 2.1% from last year. 4,100 of that is payroll, which is 1.4%. So there's not a lot of increases in there. I've got bumped up some training because we've got a new guy who requires more training. It's a little more expensive. Training for zoning board members as well. That was reduced last year, and I'd like to see if I can get that back up. They went to Saratoga and had to pay for their own accommodations for the training that's required of the volunteers. The only real new item I have on there is for a hardline phone for our conference table out in the conference area. The information I've gotten from Rich and Brian is that's about $1,000.
You mean a landline?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any questions about 17?
I have a question, not for you, but for what I'm looking at with what you handed out. And what I'm looking at, I printed out the budget 10/7/2016 off of the website.
Nice. Whatever Beth gave me in my mailbox.
So I'm looking at.
Yep, 10/7.
And maybe this isn't a question for you, Joe, maybe it's a question for Richard. Let's see. I'm just trying to
10,
make sure I know what I'm doing here. Okay, 3/0/96. 960.
Yeah, it looks like it's the same, that what he gave us.
And then, but then another 8,000?
I also have zoning,
Okay.
which
you're
is not,
including that.
which is separate, but under
And
my,
then I do have a question for Richard. And the question is, am I correct in that the 2016 original and 26 revised are transposed?
For which?
The whole thing,
For building inspector.
for the whole budget?
For the whole budget.
Did anybody else see that?
Well, of course.
Just as I was trying to go through it.
Are you looking at one of the budget reports from the system?
I'm looking at the budget itself, the munis budget
Right.
printout,
Okay.
For the
and the columns, 2016 original, 2016 revised. Shouldn't that be switched, those columns?
I don't follow your question. Why would they be switched?
Because, for instance,
Right.
on the 2016 original budget, let's look at building inspector, it's 286,743, and the
Yep.
revised is upwards, 294.
Yeah, it is.
That's to reflect the settlement of the ASME contract, right?
increase in pay.
If you look down the items, you'll see that some of them increased because we've had to revise the budget because we knew that there were changes in the appropriations.
Yeah, but,
Okay, I was thinking that it was revised from the mayor's budget.
no, that's, once you've adopted one, all that other history goes
Okay, all right,
goes
good
away.
enough.
Yeah,
That clears that up.
yeah.
Is it 4.5 or 4.8 in the pay difference? We have 4.8 here. That was contracted.
That 4.8 should be the difference between the original budget and the 2017 budget. So if you come there, I
Okay.
think it's set up to be original versus original in the comparison.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So, does anybody have any comments about the line by line for building inspector?
No, I mean, I did take note of the rise in training, and I figured it had to do with your new employee.
Yes. He's
And I looked at the telephone, and I thought, well, that's an increase, and now, you know, I mean, you might just want to say what the value of the landline is. I mean, I don't doubt that it has value, but just,
You know, quite often, we're all at the back table, or we're at meetings,
Yeah.
and there's no phone back there, so phone rings, we gotta go get it. I don't know if it's my intercom, I don't, we could use it as a conference phone too,
yeah.
for conference calls. So,
Yeah.
I've seen a need for that for the last few years, so I just put it in there.
Yeah.
Okay, Go ahead.
I do have a question. On the office supplies, Joe, we may have discussed this earlier. The 16 projection is 671.83, or the actual, I'm sorry. And then the projection goes to 3,000.
Wait, say again?
On office supplies?
Yes,
As we're going across?
yeah.
671.83 is the actual. And then we go to 3,000 for the projection.
So that's the actual for 2015?
Nope, 16.
Okay.
I mean, basically, the question is, if you only spent $670 this year so far, you're probably not gonna make 3,000, but I'm not sure that a lot of these didn't get actual projections put in, so these may be some dummy projections. I think it's kind of important for us to revisit those. I mean, you're not planning on buying another $2,300 worth of office supplies this year.
No, I mean, we've kept our spending down, so no,
Because really, the only thing we talked about was the phone, correct?
yes.
Okay. All right.
So when do you think actuals might be more
Actual.
actual?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question, you know. It's an important one, because obviously we want an estimate of how much, you know, what our profit or loss for the year would be, as soon as we can, but how accurately and how much work is it to make those projections when, you know, we're really now 60 days away from basically knowing.
What other trends can you bring in? I mean, you know, this only goes back. What I'm trying to say is, you've got 2015. I mean, do you have any other earlier figures that help you predict more clearly what?
Yeah, all of my figures are based on the last 5-year average.
Okay.
Highs and lows, you know,
Right.
and I'd be happy to talk with you all in more
Just tell
detail
me,
about
that's
that.
I
fine.
can get,
Yes.
let's see. That's office supplies?
Yeah.
So we had,
Office supplies last year, looks like the actual was 5,600, but we had carpet. I think that was the bulk of it.
yeah, and then 2014 actual was 1,900. So,
Yes, absolutely. I've got 5-year averages on this stuff, so I could break this down in more detail if you'd like.
Yeah, see if we can get what you think's the, kind of like, whatever you feel like would be the amount that you could trim down that would be
Okay.
some kind of gesture there.
does anybody have any other questions?
And the code enforcement training, that's pretty predictable what you need for the year, correct? What the requirements are?
Yes, the current code enforcement officer, the ones that are certified right now, need in-service training. We know exactly how much that costs and when it is, and then we've got a new inspector who needs 3 more classes in 17, and we've got a pretty good figure on what that's going to be, too.
Okay. I figured as much. Okay, thanks.
So let's go to teachers. You gave us a handout on separation pay and a 3-month added person.
Right, so I ran that out for 4 years and used the 2% increase. You know, the expenses are going to go up a little, we don't know how much, but I used 2%. And so in addition to all of that, below you'll see, you know, 5 items, separation pay. I've got that predicted for 18. We've got 2 people that are eligible for retirement, and, you know, it's not a perfect science, but they seem to indicate that 18 might be the year. So I've gotten the numbers from Richard as to what the separation pay would be.
Estimated.
Estimated, yes, that's right. Thank you, Richard. An estimate. You know, it fluctuates if they use their vacation time or you get paid out for it.
But this is, and what you have on there, you have a 3-month added person, and that's replacement.
Okay, so, yeah, that is a crossover for that year. That's That's what I would like. I would like to, okay, so we've got a new person, there's no list established. He's gonna have to take the test, hasn't been announced yet, but likely sometime in 2017, he's gonna have to take a test, and there's gonna be a list established. So in 2018, when Ken retires, we're gonna have a list, of somebody that's passed the test and is on that list. So I would like to take somebody before Ken retires, and then have a training window of 3 months while he's there, instead of having to wait until he retires, and then we backfill, and then that takes a couple of months, and
Okay, now, what I'm about to say is going to surprise you. But what you're saying here is that this is a replacement, and you're asking for, in that year, a 3-month overlap of an additional person to train. And what I'm asking you, and what I'm asking everyone is, given what we're doing with the city, what do you think you would really need in terms of what we're building on in the city, what we're trying to do with the city? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do I have to make the request for you?
no. Certainly, I could use another person, and being well-trained is maybe the most important part. So, yeah, if we could put another one on in that year, that'd be great.
And what would you do with another person? What could we see in terms of proactively getting at properties, getting at making this city shine in a way that all of the development is going to necessitate?
We would do everything we could. We would spend more time, we do what we have to do, but I wish we could spend more time. Yeah, we're always treading water. So if we get ahead of that, that would be fantastic.
And in your estimation, if in the next 4 years with DRI, things are going to happen, and there are going to be buildings, and there are going to be development of properties, in your estimation, do you feel that you can sustain with all that additional development what you're hanging on to now?
Well, it's a tricky question, because, we're going to have 2 new people that aren't going to be trained. And so I hate to say no. We're going to do everything we can to make sure everybody's safe and we're doing our jobs. But
I might be wrong, but are you asking for what would be the best case scenario for staffing in your office?
Yes. What are we going to need?
If you could wave a magic wand, what would you want for staff to maintain future and present infrastructure?
if I could wave a magic wand and money was no object, I would definitely take another person.
Right. And I think the other part of Becky's question, though, is a lot of what happens is reactive. It's based on building permits, it's based on complaints and those kinds of things. If you had more staff, would you be able to do, or would you plan to do anything proactive? You know, I mean, one of the things that that's been discussed, not necessarily here, but around, is like the spill of fluid from a garbage truck that happened over on Turkey Street. You know, if somebody was just kind of once a day or once a week or once a whatever, just checking all of the places where those kinds of things might happen, that might be an improvement. Is that anything that you've ever?
Yeah, that would certainly give us the flexibility to do those kinds of things.
And one more person would do that?
Yes. One more well-trained person, and that does take a little bit of time, it really does.
Well-trained in code enforcing or well-trained in inspecting?
Both.
Cross-trained.
I think, I mean, Joe and I have had some conversations about that. I mean, the hierarchy is, of course, you start first as a code inspector and you know, advance up into the more, the higher trained positions. So, you know, you'd have some better capacity at code enforcement immediately, and ultimately would have housing and building inspecting capacity a little while down the road.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the person that's put on in our office right now initially legally can enforce the city code, okay, but he can't enforce the building code until he's certified. So that's where we're at with this one. Not only does he need training, but he can't enforce the building code right now.
And if I can add another layer onto this, because we're doing so much planning, and the reason that I'm pushing this and I offer this to all the department heads, is that as this rapid pace of projects for the DRI has to come to fruition, these are factors that have to be added in. And we've talked about that with Public Works too, and developing the marina and so forth. What is the impact on supporting all of these things? And so when it comes to proposing the projects that might be part of the strategy for the DRI, we have to be able to say, can the building inspector's office sustain? Can that contribute to this, project that's being envisioned here? So these are all the multiple layers, and that's why I want you to argue for yourself, honestly for us, so that when we make a decision to say yes or no, we're owning it. We know what's coming down the pipe. So.
I appreciate that.
I think there was I think we had a conversation a while ago, and I don't think it was again at the council table. The last really big project I can remember, there was a big hospital project, and I think you told me that how much time it takes for a major piece of construction like that. You got any sense that you can share with us?
It may have been Meadowbrook.
Could have been. Actually, I think it might have been a few years earlier, and I probably talked to Rick about it, but.
You mean in terms of man hours for
Just
his
man hours,
office?
when you do, because those are really complex projects that involve an awful lot of oversight, and they also, produce big building permit fees, but.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we get a lot from the hospital, actually. There's really technical stuff within the hospital. As far as man hours go, I could put something together for you. I don't have it off the top of my head.
But I think that's kind of the place that Becky's going, that if you're treading water right now, and this is the existing thing that we're going to see in 17, okay, that's fine. We're doing a good job. I don't know of any unsafe properties. There doesn't appear to be any inspections that are being missed. But if we have this big demand that starts maybe in the next construction season, or worst case scenario in 2018, we might need more capacity for building inspector, not just code. And that's, I think, something we should talk about. Right.
Well, and it seems to me, if I recall correctly, that in our discussions over the last, since we've been in office, there's been the suggestion that you're kind of understaffed, that you're doing everything you can, and you're doing a great job with what you have, but you could improve by having more staff. And if there's going to be more demand, it seems to me that it's a no-brainer that you would need more staff.
Yeah, that's not going to change.
No.
More staff and more hours.
More hours is something we don't talk about very often, but more hours is a really good thing, because if, it's funny, but we've got the trained people there already. So if we can work them more hours, then
You're at what week now?
35.
35. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
At what point did that?
Buffer.
So if you understand what I'm saying, if we were to get another person and more hours, then that's like getting a person and a half, maybe even more than that. You don't have the benefit package that you have to pay for another person, but also the trained people are working another 5 hours a week. So if we got five people in the office, that's 25 hours.
How long have you been at 35 hours, and at what point did anything change?
I've been in that office for 24 years. It's always been 35.
Okay,
30 years,
yeah.
at least.
Back when France changed their work schedule, when they went to a 35-hour work week.
Wow.
All right. Anything else, Ross? Now that I've set you up.
No?
No, that you got the
You
podium all
want
warmed
a
up.
42-inch plasma?
That's a good idea to have.
Thanks. You got it?
That's right.
Yeah, by the way, I did get that screen.
Yeah.
You know-
Thanks to Brian, he found it for $320.
That's right.
There you go.
I remember.
Who was it that got a color printer after we said no color printer?
The fire department.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I just,
You know, I mean,
Brian, do you know if, do we own this copier or is it a lease?
I don't log in. A lot of them are owned, a lot of them are leased.
Huh?
A lot of them are owned, a lot of them are leased. I couldn't tell you offhand which is which.
Because isn't there a savings for leasing at times because it
Depends on how long we
includes
keep it.
toner?
If we keep it longer than the 5 years is typical, then we save it, we own it, we lease it, and then we save it, if it's less than that. Because after we pay it off for 5 years, if it's 2 years of not paying, then we save it.
Because typically the toners and ink and everything is included with the lease.
No, it's not, we're on a plan where it's a pay per page, it's a consumption plan, so black and white pages cost us about half a cent. Color, depending on the machine, are about 4 cents a page. So color does add a premium to the cost of the machine, but that's not where the cost increase is. The cost increase is in the actual consumption, where you're going from half a cent a page to 4 cents a page, so you're talking 8 times more costly to print color, not so much to have the capability.
so you want to go?
So I don't really know where you want to start. Well, so general code is big for me. That's going to be the next 3 years. And then there's going to be a yearly maintenance fee after that. But you've already all signed off on that, so
That's the
E-code, general code, yeah. Another item that I have that hadn't been put on the, that I'd never put on the budget before, is for filing cabinets. And I know that might be, but I feel that I need fire-resistant filing cabinets that lock, shut. I have the laws, I have the ordinances, I have contracts, leases, deeds, subpoenas. There's just a lot of things that, and if you've seen my filing cabinets. And so I put in for one, and I know that looks expensive, but it's and it is expensive. But it's got like a lifetime warranty on it, the delivery's free, they'll bring it up a flight. We don't have a docking station, so there's charges that are incurred if you buy a product that's not as expensive as that, but then you have to pay that. Looking into it was about $200, and they'll do what they call a white glove delivery. They bring it in.
2 inches to the left.
Oh.
No, I know you telling me. I'm sorry, not the I'm sorry. You can tell them that.
I'm really good, I'm really good.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Take any direction from.
I'm sorry, please.
That's the office equipment line, that's $2,000?
Yes. And I
That's the
don't,
only thing, is that cabinet is $2,000.
but I would like to have 4 of them.
Oh, okay.
So my goal is to do one a year
Oh.
for the next, you wanted us to, right?
Yes.
They're expensive. It's about $19.50, at the cabinet. And could I look for another one? I don't mind trying to do that, but I did try to make the best effort in one that's replaceable. If there is a fire, it's 1,700, so the room can go to 1,700, inside 350 before it would be damaged. The insulation, I just tried to look at the best product I could get because I only plan on getting it once. If it goes through a fire and it gets destroyed or something happens to it, they replace it.
So let me ask you this question, it's just a practical question that I will probably stop asking these in another month and a half. Are you gonna start with the alphabet, or, you know what I mean?
I'm going to try to prioritize the documents that I feel are most important. I feel like our local laws from the inception of the city,
Right,
and then I have to think about growth forward. So maybe 3 cabinets would be ideal for what I have now, but I have to think about expansion.
yeah.
And that's kind of-
In terms of room as well, I would imagine,
Well, I'll pull out the,
what you have right now.
I'm trying to fit it into where I currently have those files.
Probably every year she needs to purge.
Okay, and this is another question probably for you too, Brian. To what extent is preservation of paper documentation?
Well, that was another thing I'd like to bring up, thinking down the road. Now, I didn't put it in my budget, but maybe something you guys should think about, as well as myself, is digitalizing all of the documents we have. So maybe we can store them somewhere else, but like, I'll give you an example. When I am asked for backup for a meeting, I run downstairs in the basement, and I go through the dirty old files, and eventually I find it. So, yes, it's important you have to keep the original document, but wouldn't it be easier if we could scan it, use the MU1 schedule in that, use a disposition where you can dispose of a record? I mean, that's ideal. That for me is something that I would like to do. I am the records officer, so when I think about all the departments I have to contact to try to, and not just for foiling, but for access for anybody who wants to use a record. Paul might need something from a grant that he wasn't even part of, but if we could get it in the system and, catalog it in a certain way and then dispose of it in a proper way too, that we don't have to dig and find and, oh, there it is, and when should I dispose of it? It's something that you can print out, search for, print out, and dispose of a record in a timely fashion.
So you wouldn't by law have to keep original documentation, paper documentation?
Well, certain records you actually do have to keep. If the original record came in a paper format, you are required to keep it in a paper format. If it's electronic format, you keep it in electronic format.
Is there a point where we're going to cross?
Doesn't necessarily need in this building.
Right, and ideally, wouldn't we like to not have to worry that our records are downstairs in a basement that could flood? Perhaps have it in a building where all records are stored and caged. Police has this cage, Public Works has this cage, city clerk has this cage. I mean, that's ideal.
Right.
That's a dream.
Right.
That you should, and maybe we could think about together.
Yeah.
That's what and it makes the city more efficient. When you're.
A little bit, the police department has applied 2 years in a row now for the LGR-MIF grant to exactly start this process, at least at the police department level, and they've been denied 2 years in a row now. But it is a problem that's rampant citywide. Big enough and costly enough in the sheer manpower to scan those documents, it's probably a capital project.
And the problem with keeping records longer than you need to is keeping records longer than you need to. So if someone foils me for something and I have the record and I have to look for it, I have to look for it. I mean, unless, so there's a history that you have to go back on too. I would, it's going to be a collaborative effort with all department heads and myself to find out where are all the records, where do we stand with the records, what has been disposed of. We have an MU1 schedule we have to follow. I mean, that's and when I first started, I would say easily probably the first 6 to 8 months was going through one room, just purging documents that could be purged so I could have room for other documents.
And if this were, if that were to be a capital project that we funded at some point, how long of a process would that take to digitize everything? A year or two?
2 to be safe.
Oh, I would,
And it's not just about digitizing.
I think it would be more,
You're selecting the software that you're going to manage it. You're going to get the storage in place. Now you're developing your processes. What do we do with this paper document? How do we, because going through your backlog is great, but now how do we eliminate generating more paper?
going forward, I think 2 years is,
It's aggressive, for sure.
very aggressive.
Yeah.
I would think it would be longer than that, but,
And I think there's also some good sense in digitizing the historic records as well. I mean, the things that are interesting, because they're old. They
Yeah.
can be fragile, and we just
Exactly.
have to be accessible and not be harmed.
Okay. So I'll have to keep going.
well, that was kind of, those were two big things for me. I have to think about staffing. I have somebody who's eligible to retire. I believe that might be happening in 2017. In my office, we're doing process and procedures booklets because there is really no training other than what I go to. I come back, so if someone were to leave the office abruptly, yes, they have somebody there, but let's say that one person is left by themselves after 3 weeks, someone comes in, they need something, we have a reference.
Great.
And while it might take a little bit longer, they could probably work themselves through it.
So in terms of training, you have a significant increase in conferences. That's, I assume.
Well, that was because when I did my budget, I hadn't yet gone to my training, so I didn't know where next year's training was going to be. So I looked at what the hotel was that the training suggested, and that was significantly more than the hotel I actually stayed at. I got onto the NICOM site, found out the training is probably in the same exact area. So that could actually be reduced, and that's one item I had on here, could probably, and I think I ended up using total training between $900 and $1,000. So, you know, you could probably take a couple hundred off from that, and that wouldn't hurt my budget.
So to
That
leave
wouldn't
you
hurt.
at 1,000?
1,000 would be good.
Okay, so that's 470. Okay. And then 2 words that everyone's going to hear for the next 2 months, contract services.
So one of my contract services for mine is the general code, is the E-code. That's
Okay,
significantly
that's for
higher.
that, okay.
And then the maintenance fee, yearly fee.
Okay.
So the general code, I believe, is, you know, between 6,600 and 6,700, and the maintenance fee is roughly 1,200. And then, you know, I have to, for antivirus and other things, minor things. So that's why that is increased. And you'll notice on municipal buildings that the contracted services there has increased, and that's because the cleaning service contract has also increased, and that's,
Yeah, by another $5,000.
actually, I think it was,
And that's,
Was
which buildings is that for? Here, right?
that's for this building, yeah.
We should talk about that a little bit. The price for cleaning here and cleaning at the police station have gone up dramatically, and it might be worth it for us to consider actually creating a cleaner position. It's something we should talk about. Distinct possibility that, you know, we had some other issues. We did have a small theft a year or so ago from a contract cleaner. So you know, there might be some advantages, some other advantages. So I think that's one of the things we should talk about.
One position, how many people are employed through the contracted services by contracting?
They usually come with 2 and do, you know, each place fairly quickly. A single person could do both and more. You know, I mean, one of the things we do now is we don't have any dedicated building maintenance people. I mean, if a light bulb needs to be changed, we don't have anybody directly on staff that does that, of course. And when in doubt, we turn to Public Works and ask them to help us, which they do. But, you know, there are some other things that might be included in that description as well, might not be. But, you know, I think that's a little bit larger discussion, and we probably need the police department in on it as well.
Okay. Do you guys have anything else for Sylvia?
And the court contracts, any surprises there?
No, they have one major project this year. You know, they kind of dictate it, we pay for it, but we get reimbursed. It's not,
How much do we get reimbursed?
105, so we're
105%,
good with that.
That's right, we like that.
Any thoughts on fee changes?
Oh, yes, that's what I wanted to bring up.
On what?
I would like you guys to look at that again.
Okay.
Especially the vendor fees, in particular the vendor fees, when vendors are coming in to me saying, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous how much you're charging us, minimally. Like, you know, they,
Well, you had sent us something last year.
I had, and I'll be-
Would you want to revise that, what you had sent last year?
I could look at revising, I did print it out and bring a copy of it. Yeah, I can look at it again and maybe change those numbers, or maybe not, or maybe just send them to you and you can make a decision. It's not just the vendor fees, it's also, you know, hauler fees, tree removal,
Yeah.
fees along those lines.
Okay.
That is, and I think part of looking at it is looking at how much, yes, there was some increase, I believe, in 2012, but if you look at from 1990 to 2012, it's so minimal that even though there was an increase, like I really think, and that's something we should be looking at, maybe every 5 years or every, just as a,
A schedule.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right, if not just for the purpose of the price of the fees, the applications of the fees. That's certainly increased in the past couple of years, I would think, just with the vendors downtown and all.
I would say definitely last year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could send that to me
Mhm.
and the council, that would be great.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to have discussions in the future about fees and also about
Contracts.
contracted services and possibly a full-time hire to be smart. Is that it for you?
I believe it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah. Community development. What can you contribute to the city?
Ask not.
Right. So,
Thank you.
I mean, regarding the budget for next year, didn't ask for a ton different as far as that goes. Salary increases a little bit to account for that, and a little bit around celebrations. Sandra's here if you have questions around the events that occur. So be happy to talk about that first, and then I guess a little bit around the idea of what you guys are looking at for 3 years out. A little bit different thought as I was going through for the 3 years. Much of what community development does relies on a lot of different things. So I guess if we tackle the practical next year's budget, if you have any questions, happy to answer those as best I can, and then talk about maybe moving forward after that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So,
Pretty conservative.
there's not a lot, there's not a lot that has changed from year to year. I think we can probably make it through as far as what we're doing.
Are we able to use any of the planning money from the DRI to put into community development for various things that this community development office has to do in order to support the DRI?
I hope so. I guess we still don't really know ultimately how the money can be spent. That should be coming soon, is my understanding. But as far as what we can put in for, I don't have any guidelines from Department of State or anything at this point.
And one of the things they talked about early on is that if you decided the way you needed to develop your downtown was to have a dedicated downtown manager for a year or two, you could do that. So I'm guessing that the answer is probably yes, but the devil will be in the details.
In the details, yeah. And I think, from a practical standpoint moving forward, if we're talking about in an ideal world, support for the Community Development Office would be wonderful. Grants are excellent. I love them. I think they do a lot for cities and colleges, but then you have to implement those grants after the award comes through and everybody, is like, yeah, we got the grant, and now all the work happens on the backside of that. So there's a lot of grants that the city has, several of which were in place before I got here. We've received some more since I've been here. We've applied for 4 more this year. The DRI is going to drive what we apply for next year. There are grants outside of the DRI that we're going to apply for various projects. The support for both that and then events on the other side, if there was somebody that could help with purchase requisitions and the paperwork end of things.
So you're talking office assistant?
It would be wonderful for our office between Sandra and I. I think that's probably the thing that, I'm sitting at my desk maybe a little more than I should because we have the grants that we have to do and the reports that have to be done, and it's a necessary evil, all the paperwork, but it's there. And so, moving forward, I think, I didn't ask for that for next year, officially in this. I think the DRI may be able to help us with that if that's possible. But moving forward, if we're going to continue to grow, and I think we will, that's probably the biggest need that we have. We're good on, we've got a pretty good handle on, what we spend on supplies and things, and that'll sort of naturally creep up as costs do. But we're not going to see a year where we need, necessarily an enormous amount in supplies or things like that. But that extra person, particularly on the support side, would be wonderful.
How many grants did you file this year?
How many did we file this year? I want to say 4 specific to the city, and then I assisted as a partner on 3 others. And if we do get them, then the city, we have and that's, I guess one of the points I wanted to make as I was thinking about all of this is that community development doesn't occur we don't do this by ourselves. Every grant that I apply for affects all of the other departments in the city. I think that's important to note. The events that occur, same thing. We rely on Public Works and Recreation, and so I think in looking forward for what community development can do, I think we can do a lot, but I also think we need to, we have to look at what it means for the city to think of match funding, because we can apply for all the grants that we want, but they generally don't pay for everything. So we have to, consider that as part of budgeting. Is there a limit to the amount of match that the city would like to have? Like a cap. Okay, we've got X amount of money, and that's what we're going to use towards our match. Now, there are, of course, ways that you can leverage matches. It doesn't always have to be cash, but sometimes it is a cash match, and those things have to be accounted for. Staff time, if we're applying for a Public Works grant, what that means for my office as far as reporting, what that means for Public Works as far as the way the work gets done, and how engineering has to be part of that as well. So it was hard for me to necessarily project out a budget over the next 3 years in thinking about that. Much of what community development does is driven by the council, the mayor's office, public input, and things like that as well. So, but we've got a lot of great things happening. The Downtown Revitalization Initiative is going to the reason for the February deadline is to make the CFA applications for next year. So that means, this year we maybe put in 4, either as a partner or as a lead applicant. Next year it may be 8, or 2018 it may be, we're looking at leveraging this money to do other things, and the number of events that occur in the city now have increased quite a bit from since Sandra's been here, and the time that it takes to put those on. So, it's tough to say where we're going to be, but I do know.
Apparently, we're going to add in a French festival.
I did hear rumors of that.
Great unveiling.
Well,
Which I'm happy with, by the way. It's always
French or Canadian?
those of us who are French.
Okay.
We may do both.
I think that would be fair, it's the two
We
populations.
may have a very specific idea for you in a week or so.
Okay.
The centennial of this building next year, too.
Let me ask,
That's true. That's exactly right. I forgot
The
about that.
windows be done in time.
does your office generate more work out, or does it take more work in? And I'm probably not asking that right, but when you do a grant,
Sure.
is there more work to get the grant or more work once you've got it?
So different,
For you, I realize,
different
yeah.
kinds of work. It is much more focused short term. You generally have a very short amount of time to turn around whatever the grant is, so it's an intense 3 weeks. Then you have about 6 months till they tell you if there's money or not, usually. And then it becomes very sort of, it builds on itself. So reporting is done quarterly, and those quarters are not always the same. So, one agency, we have to do it a calendar year, one agency where August through July and things like that. So the work, it's a different kind of work, but I think the execution of the grants, there's a lot more to it than the initial. The initial grant is intense for a couple of weeks, but then you're dealing with the paperwork for 5 years, depending on the grant, or 4 years. So, and then when you start to stack those up, it really becomes really just kind of making sure that you don't forget that something is due as things are going.
And is most of your time spent in the office or out of the office?
Right now, I probably fall a little bit more towards in the office, and I probably should fall a little more towards out of the office. I think that's, where we're seeing the work in the grant side of things.
If somebody's anxious to talk to you about community development and you're not in, what happens to that person? Slip a note under your door?
No, most people, voicemails and emails and,
Right. Okay.
But
But that's not they're not getting you right away because you're out of the office and there's nobody else left
yeah,
to watch the story.
yes, Sandra's out as Sandra's out as well, for sure.
Right, so she's
But that's where
guilty.
a constant presence in the office would be helpful.
She's guilty by association.
She is.
Okay, all right.
Always.
As you may be, yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Since we've been looking at this office develop over time, and contracted services were a big part of, helping to develop the whole office, how has that role changed, or has it, since you've gotten a full-time position? We have a full-time position.
I think if the contractor service is about half that it was prior to
Right.
the full-time
46
position.
versus
About 20. We'll do about 20. The contracted services is a little bit more of a support role than a main sort of writing role when it comes to grants and things. It helps pick helps pick up the little bit that we can't do as far as the writing goes.
We've had the same contractor pretty much throughout.
Since, to my knowledge, since
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Good job, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Thanks, Paul.
IT.
It's,
IT. And that is a lovely shirt that you have.
Thanks, Paul.
It's pretty, right?
Lovely.
Where do you want to start? I bet you're looking at that one big number that went up.
100%?
Which one, the 2,400 line?
There's
I'm looking at that
office
one, but there's the one
supplies,
lower. Mhm.
telephone, and tech equipment.
Yeah, I'm
all
looking at
big
tech
jump
equipment.
in.
Okay.
That's
So,
the one I got circled.
the tech equipment one is the big one. And you're looking at it, it went up about 34,000, I think.
Yep.
So, talking about 3-year or 5-year planning, the entirety of that increase is $34,000 for new computers. We have got about 210 of them in the city, and 70 of those or better come this budget year will be 7 years old or older. So
How many total?
about 210, and about a third of them are going to be in this budget year 7 years old or older. So that $34,000 is both hardware and software replacement for those machines. It seems like it's a ways out, but so most of our machines run Windows 7 and Office 2010, both of which are end-of-life in 2020. So with a 5-year plan, we actually won't make it to replacing them all before they're end-of-life and not supported. So we'd be a year out, and I'd like to get behind that a little faster. So, I mean, I think we can maybe worry about a year, being a year late. That's not horrible. Unlike the Windows 7, where we were 2.5 years out of support, and when we get there. So that's the big jump in the 2,400. It's pretty easily explained.
Thoughts? This is pretty
It's hard to
tough.
argue, yeah. I mean,
I understand, you said a 5-year plan.
5-year plan, which we've never had in the city. In fact, traditionally, traditional PCs, standard PCs, have been requested by the departments on an ad hoc basis, and we tend not to get any real purchasing power when we do that either.
But if it's a 5-year plan, do we have to do a third of the computers in 1 year?
I'm not asking to do a third, I'm only asking to do a fifth.
Oh,
Yeah, there's 70, yeah, this will get us about 40 machines.
okay.
okay.
The 34,000.
Yeah, and that's hardware and software.
That's 50 machines.
It'll be about 40 machines.
40.
Yeah, about that.
Okay, good. 'Cause I was using.
So again, so the quick numbers are, we have about 210 standard PCs in the city. That doesn't count some specialty ones and a few servers and things like that, but desktop PCs. About 70 of them, actually a little over that, are 7 years old or older. Some are 8, 9, 10 years old. On the flip side of that, though, so you want to talk about contracted services, you'll see that that number is actually down a little. And also, did you give them,
I did not.
Mr. Mayor, there's a sheet he's going to distribute. Many of our contracted services give us a discount if we pay for 3 years up front, rather than paying annually. And it's a big discount generally. If you look at that, it's a 9-year projection for most of my renewals that give us a discount. And if we simply switch to 3-year budgeting on that, it'll save $112,000 over 9 years. But it requires
And upfront.
an upfront.
So that's not built into this budget?
It's not.
So if we built it into this budget, that's another $67,000?
No, it'd be like another 30. And that's if you did it all. We could phase it in, bits and pieces.
The 30?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier for me to keep track of, easier for me to budget if we did all of it up front. But, you know, those,
And this is one of those things where we could really, budget it at, about, what, $23,000 a year, knowing that we're, and for 2 years, it just goes into either fund balance or a reserve-like savings account, so that it's a pretty flat amount over your budgets, but you just spend it every 3 years.
but we're not talking a small amount of dollars saved.
Right, no,
It's-
that's true.
No. So that's 110 3-year cycle?
It'd be 9 years, over 9 years.
9 years, okay.
I did it as 3-year cycles.
Right. 3
So 12,000.
12 and a half a year figure, just by prepaying.
And how much would it add to the budget for this coming year?
If we did it all, about 30.
$36,700.
Spend money to save money.
Well, and the other thing to think about is, if there's a way that we can find somebody else to give us the $36,000. We haven't looked to see if there's any grant money out there. We haven't discussed this with the Financial Restructuring Board or anybody like that. But I mean, that's the kind of investment that they'd like, is say, if we can give you $30,000 and you save 12 for the next 10 years, that's a good investment. So that's something that we could put in our package.
Okay, so let's, since you mentioned it, let's talk about the FRB. If we go through the budgeting process and we identify various areas where we are doing what they would like, which is spending money to save money over the long term, and we would come to the end of our budget process and submit that package, but then how long before we would know whether they would accept that?
So 2 things will happen. Obviously, we can get a staff reaction, and while there is no hard and fast rule, and they have no authority to say yes or no, they can give us an idea, well, this is the kind of thing that the board is generally interested in. So it's a little bit, kind of the wink and the nod kind of thing, says, yeah, this isn't outrageous, this is something that, we'd be comfortable recommending. The committee will probably meet in March of next year, so that would be probably when there'd be a definitive answer.
You don't look like you're reassured.
Well, listen, I mean, and we'd have to also talk to our financial people, but think about this. If we're gonna save $12,000 a year, let's just go borrow $36,000. Take out a 3-year note or a 2-year note, because frankly, there's a lot of ways, it just makes good financial sense.
Right.
I don't think I'd want to go through a bond for it. I'd rather go for a short-term loan, but, you know, I mean, those are the kinds of things that a little bit different business, but yeah, it just makes sense.
Well, and as, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember the meeting with those people, their ceiling on where the amount of money they have to give to a municipality was $3 million.
Really?
Yeah,
Boy, let's ask for it all.
that's what I mean. I mean, why mess around with just $36,000? So I mean, I'm thinking.
But I mean, I think you've got to, yeah, you've got to give them, I think, elements that
Right.
show, here's the investment, here's the
Right.
return, here's the investment, here's the return. Yeah.
What- Did I miss the discussion, any summary that was done when I was out about the overall, I mean, have we discussed the overall findings of that board or the overall
What-
summary?
Not really. I mean, what's happened is they've asked us to identify things like this.
Right.
That would provide some savings. They've given us some examples. They talk to Richard at length, every time he calls, right?
They don't talk to, they talk at.
Yeah, you know, their basic premise is if there's something if we can, a one-time expense can have a great return on investment, we want to talk. That means, for example, we have discussed if we choose to expand the marina, they would probably give us some portion of that as well, which would then again, the result of that would be our debt service would be reduced and we would have actually more revenue in the general fund. We've talked about things like healthcare, trying to make a healthcare change, very, very common for the Financial Restructuring Board, where if there's there was one area, and I forget where it was, where there was a slight change in co-pays, and they just said, well, we'll give you some money to establish a fund to make up for that, you know, that people can access, because the overall savings was worth it. So that's the stage we're at, is really having those conversations. Now, to do that, we're having conversations with other municipalities about, are there things that we can do that will, are there other economies that we can do that may have some startup costs? So I, you know, had a good conversation with Mike Zerlo about, are there any aspects of city and county government where there's enough overlap that we might be able to come to some shared service? There's no great fruit to report on that at this point, but we had a pretty good conversation. Same thing, some of the conversations with the town of Plattsburgh are revolving around the same thing. Nothing really concrete yet,
Yeah.
but lots of conversations.
So so it doesn't seem to me like there's anything really concrete we can depend upon, since the process doesn't really come to fruition until
No, we
March.
won't, no, I think
Yeah.
anytime, if we have these discussions, we have to have them with the thought, yes, there's a chance, and yes, there may be a good chance, but you always need a plan B, just because it might not happen. And frankly, when do we pay our contract services for license fees and those things?
Oddly enough, they tend to come due in November, December, almost all of them, a few of
So,
them
I mean,
early, but.
that's one of those where if
Yeah.
we didn't get it, we could say, well, we're gonna take it out of the budget or go
Or
borrow
go
it, yeah.
borrow it, okay.
So we have time to develop a plan B in that case.
Okay.
Actually, it might be smart if we went and borrowed it in November of this year.
Unfortunately, I've worked on we could go back and redo it, but yeah, I mean, most of it's in the works already for this year, so,
Oh, to pay the annual.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple we could do still, yes.
Okay.
What else?
It's small, but you have more training built in.
Yeah, that's restoring it to the 2015 level. And part of that is Windows Server 2016 just came out, and we'll have to get up to speed on that. So, we own it, we bought it. Now we need to really kind of get our feet wet with it.
Okay.
And
Anybody else? Brian?
Office supplies, I'll bring that one out, because that one's up. I'll tell you, so this one's a little funny. So we've been in that office now for 2.5 years, and it was the former community development office, and we're just now running out of supplies.
It's a well-stocked man.
They had pre-purchased a lot of things for us, let's put it that way. So, hence the increase there.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought you guys didn't use paper.
It's not paper.
Rubber bands,
Things like that, stickies, lots of stickies.
tech people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whiteboards are expensive, who knew?
Words.
Yeah, so,
And then you have to buy pens all the time. if
that's
you
right.
have a chalkboard.
Well, you saw the whiteboard in the office.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
You want to put there as a start?
That was
Okay.
our list.
That was our list, and what I'll do is I'll think hard about the next round, which will be after we have a regular session next week and then the work session then, and start drawing in some of the others. And, you know, we have to look at, for example, mayor's budget and so forth. Those are smaller things, but we'll get to the other offices.
The entrees? The entrees? Okay.
Yeah.
So are you saying we're gonna have a budget session week after next thing?
Yes.
Okay.
The rest, just so everyone knows, from here on out, the work sessions will be all budget sessions. And I'll just try to make sure that department heads have a heads up. Because we always tend to adjust, because sometimes we need to take longer on one, or call back, or so on and so forth. and
Here's
so on.
extras of those.
Did you want to
So-
get one with Mike?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate all
everyone.
your work,
I'll
everybody.
put that in his box.
Here's this.
Is there a third signature on that?
We know when it needs one.
See you.
I don't know if Josh wants to do that. Okay.